Hey everybody, my name is Karen, and in this video we're going to be going through how to build out a very simple Android app. So this app will be required for you to submit in order to get into class, and we have 3 required user stories that we'll be going through building out in the video. However, if you're interested, we do have a list of a couple optional user stories, and these features are a bit more advanced, so we're going to have a follow-up video where we will be building out these optional user stories. However, in the first video, we're going to be building out required user stories. And this should be a very simple way, and hopefully this will just be a way for you to get more familiar with Android Studio, navigating around Android Studio, and being able to build and deploy an app into an emulator. So let's get started by looking at what we want to build out today. So we have 3 required user stories, and I've loaded up a built-out app here in order to demonstrate what we want to build out. So the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to display some kind of custom text. So in my app here, my custom text says hello from Karen with an exclamation mark. So this is text that I customly input into my app in order for it to be displayed. The second thing is we want to be able to set a custom background. So for my app here, I have this blue background that I had customly input into it. And the last thing we want is we want to be able to have a button that does something when it's clicked. And in this instance, when this button is clicked, we want to change the color of our text here. So my button here is called Change Text Color. And if you'll notice, when I click it, the text here is going to change from white to red. So that was really quick, but hopefully you noticed that the text color changed really fast right after I clicked the button. And so these are the 3 user stories we're going to be trying to build out today from scratch. So let's get started by loading up Android Studio. So this is the first screen that I see when I open the Android Studio app, and we're going to be starting with a new Android Studio project. So this is the first screen that comes up when you say you want to create a new Android project. The application name is what you want to call your app. So for example, if we were making the Facebook app, we would put Facebook here. If we were making the Uber app, this would be Uber. So I'm going to call this anything. You can call this anything I want, but I'm going to call this Hello Karen. Kind of play off Hello World. The company domain can be really anything. So for example, you could have your name in here. I think karen.example.com is perfectly fine, so I'm going to leave that alone. The project location is where all the files that this project is going to be generated is going to go into. So right now I've got a default to go into a specific new directory that it's created on my desktop. So this new directory is going to be called Hello Karen, and it's going to live on my desktop. The package name you could change if you want it, but I'm going to leave it alone for now. There's a couple options here. We can include C++ support, which is common if you want to do some other kind of interfaces. We could also include Kotlin support. So Kotlin, if you haven't heard, is a new language that's gaining a lot of traction in the Android community because it's a lot less verbose than Java and is very good at handling null pointer exceptions. However, since we're kind of just building out the start app, I'm going to stick with Java, but if you're interested in Kotlin, definitely feel free to read up more about it. A lot of new companies are using it, but a lot of bigger companies are still on Java. So if you're doing a Java app, you definitely can't go wrong there. So once I clicked next, the next thing is we have this form about asking us what kind of app we're going to build. So 99% of the time we're going to be building apps for phones and tablets, right? That's what most apps are designed to do. But we have a couple of other options here. So the first other option we see here is building a Wear app. So this would be if you're building an app for like an Android watch. And then if you were building an app for the TV, or for Android Auto, which is for cars, maybe you're building, like, for example, the Mercedes-Benz car has some Android apps running on it. Android Things is a new thing that's just been recently announced, and that's for building apps that are more of Internet of Things things. So it's not running on a phone. It could be running on a Raspberry Pi instead, but you could write the same exact Android code and it could run on a Raspberry Pi, which is pretty cool. But for our purposes, we're just running our app on a phone, so I'm going to leave this checkbox here the same, and then it asks us what API we want to target. So if you look into this drop-down list, the latest API right now is 28. But if we target the latest API 28, you'll see that our app will run on less than 1% of devices. So that's not very helpful. And we can look through all these other options, dating all the way back to API 14. But the problem with supporting older versions of APIs is there's going to be a lot more things you have to think about. Some new methods may not be available in those old APIs. So if you're supporting very old APIs, you're going to run into a lot more backwards compatibility problems. So the safe bet for now is usually Marshmallow. And if you're really interested or you have a really difficult time deciding what to do, you could always click the button that says help me choose and see the statistics of how many phones you'll be able to support based on which Android platform version you're gonna target. So Android Marshmallow was the default, so I'm gonna trust Google on that and just go with that option for now. So once we click into the next button, now we have this option about what to do for our app. Should we have no activity, a basic activity, all these different options. So an activity in Android, you can kind of think of it as basically just a web page. So most apps have at least one web page because they have to have at least a home screen. A lot of apps have multiple activities, but for all apps there is at least one activity because there has to be something that runs. So we're going to go ahead and go with the empty activity for now. That gives us everything we're going to need. The basic activity comes with, as you can see, this Fab button here, which is a floating action button. Or we could go with a bottom navigation activity, which comes with this bottom bar. But we're not building out a very complicated app for now, so I'm going to go with the empty activity and click Next. Once we do that, it will ask us what we want to name our activity. So usually main activity is a pretty good starter, and for every activity there's a view file that goes along with it, and that's what it's asking from us with this layout name. So what do we want to name the view file that goes with this activity? So the view file is called activity_main, which is pretty good because then we know it correlates with this main activity. So this auto-generate stuff all seems pretty good to me right now, so I'm going to click Finish. So once I do that, Gradle and Android Studio is going to do its magic to pull in all the resources and all the dependencies that we need in order for our project to run. So this step may take a long time or it may take a little time depending on whether you've built previous project before or depending on how fast your computer runs. So luckily in this case it didn't take too long for me. But down here we can see that Gradle is still building right now. Still doing some work. Oh, so now it's finished and we're good to go. So hopefully at this point everybody is on the same page where we see a built project and we're on this main activity page. So the first thing we're going to try to do is we're going to look at the layout file that was generated. So what we see here, the first screen that Android Studio took us to was the main activity thing. So this main activity thing is where all the logic for code that we want to write is going to be. So let's take a little tour around Android Studio to see what we have here. So on the left-hand panel here, we have this project view where we can look at all our files. And there's different kinds of views that you can look at. So right now we're in the Android view, which is a pretty good default view to look at. And from here, we can click into these different files that are generated. So let's take a look at some of the important files that we actually care about. So one of the important files that we care about is going to be under Java, and then it's going to be under your package name. So this main activity file is the main crux of our app. This is where all of the logic for our app right now is going to go in. And if we go into the resources directory, we're going to see some kinds of different directories. So we have the drawables. This is where all the icons will go. So right now we don't have much. We have some icons for our launcher. So this is the launcher icon that you see on your phone's home screen for your app. And then we have a layout directory. So this is where all the layout files for our activities are going to go. So if you remember before, I had said that every activity usually is also accompanied by a layout file. And these layout files are XML files, and this is where they're living right now, in this layout directory. So we could go ahead and open this up, and we'll see this layout file under main activity. And there's some other stuff, but that's the basic crux of it. These values are where stuff like the values of colors are stored. So right now we have 3 different colors, and we're storing them with their hex colors and giving them a name. So how this works is there's a hex color. That's the color that you see here in this preview, and this is the name that we give it. We could change this to anything. These are just the default colors. We have some strings defined. Right now, the only string that's defined is the name of our app. And that's the basic crux of it. So I think the 2 most important files we care about right now are going to be our main activity file and our layout file for the main activity. So if you notice, this layout file was generated for us automatically. And on the right-hand side, we can see a preview of how the layout file looks. So this might take a while to load depending on what computer you're on, but this is a preview that you can look at while you're editing your XML file here. Another way to look at how your XML file will look is if you, on the two buttons here, right now I'm in the text version, which is why I see all this XML code, but I could also go into design version, and this is how I could see what my layout will look like, and this is also where I could drag things around to make the views go where I want to go. So this is pretty cool because when I drag views around, the code automatically updates here. And I could also do the same thing here. So if you notice, if I drag things around, values here are changing. So I could basically do all my layout coding by dragging things around here. So that's pretty cool. Down here on the bottom, we have a couple things. The most important thing is going to be this logcat tab on the bottom, and this is where you could be able to debug and look at the stack traces if you have crashes in your apps. You could print out print statements to help you figure out what's going on. The terminal is, I don't really use that much, so I probably don't have to worry about that. The build is, this is usually where errors will come out if you have an error building your app, but usually I also don't worry about that too much. And so this is the basic place, this is the main place where I'm on most of the time for the bottom thing. If we go back to the left-hand panel here, you'll see that there's this structure, and this is useful in that once you're in a file on this main view, you can see all the methods that are here. So for example, if I created a new random method here, I would be able to see it in this structure view here. So this is helpful for classes that get really big and you don't want to scroll through the whole class to figure out what this class does or what it can do. Then you can look at the structure view here. And that's most of the important stuff here. So we're gonna go ahead and actually get started with trying to build out some of our user stories. So if we go back to our first required user story, it's that we want the user to be able to see custom text in a label. And from our previous example app, it said hello from Karen. So we're gonna try to emulate that. So if we go back to Android Studio and we're going back to our main XML file, this is the main XML file. All the code here was automatically generated. So what happened here was they automatically gave us a constraint layout. So when you're building out a view, there's different ways to lay out all the different things you want to go into the view. And constraint layout is one way to lay out them. So that's one type of layout. But usually constraint layout is good for views that get a little more complex. So say you have like a lot of buttons and text views that you want to go on certain parts of the screen. Constraint layout is great for that. But it's also a little bit more complicated. So we're gonna actually get started with something a little simpler called relative layout. So I'm gonna change constraint layout here to relative layout. I'm going to make this a little bigger so the text is easier to see. So right now the only thing I've done is, this used to be constraint layout, but I'm going to change it to relative layout for our purposes because our app for this first version is going to be pretty simple and we won't need all the powers that constraint layout can offer. And if you notice, this will give us a red squiggly line. And if we look at the warning by hovering our mouse over it, it says that our start tag has a wrong closing tag. So what that means is we're going to have to scroll down here, and down here where we had a closing tag of constraint layout, we're also going to have to change this to relative layout. So this is going to give us more flexibility. So once we've done that, I'm going to delete this text view because we don't want this text view that says hello world anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this block. So once we've done all that, we can start actually working by dragging things around, which is a lot easier than typing out code. So I'm going to change from the text tab to the design tab here. And right now we don't have anything because we deleted that block of pre-generated text. So what we want is, if we go back to our user story, is we want a custom text that says hello from your name. So going back into Android Studio, if you look on this panel here, we have a lot of common stuff that we could automatically drag and drop into our view here. So the first thing we want is something that will be able to let us display text. And the thing we want to do that is going to be called a text view. So over here on a text view, I'm just going to go ahead and click on it and drag and drop it down here. So now I have this thing called a text view, and I could start customizing any way I want. So what we want is for it to say hello from your name. So mine is going to say hello from Karen. And the way to do that is if you go on the right hand side here, so you're going to see all these different options that you can configure for your view. And what you want to do is, if you don't see all the options here, it's because you want to click on the view specifically here. So once you click on the view, you start seeing all the attributes that you can start editing. And we want this to say something different than text view. We want to say something more meaningful and more customized. So I want mine to say hello from Karen with an exclamation mark. And once I type that and I click out of it, it's going to update automatically on this view here. So this is a bit small, and that's not very readable. And we could make that a little bit bigger by changing the text size. So if you scroll down a little bit more, there's going to be this option here for you to set the text size. And right now it's set to 14, but I want it to be something bigger so I could read it more easily. So I'm going to set it to see how 18 looks like. That still looks a little small, so I'm going to try 24. Yeah, that seems alright for me. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. I can set my text color by clicking into this and clicking on these three dots on the right here. So I have no colors defined right now, but if you go into color and you go into Android, there are some basic colors that are predefined for you. So I want my text to be black just so it's more readable. So I'm going to set my text to black. So that's all I've done for now. And I'm going to try running this to see if it works. So in order to run our project, we're going to go on top here where it says run, and we're going to click on the run app. And that's going to pop up this window that's going to ask you, okay, where do you want me to run this app? So right now I have a Mac emulator open, and that's what this pixel option is appearing here. If you had like your own Android phone plugged in, you would also be able to see that here, so you would be able to run your app on your own phone. So I'm okay with running it on my emulator, so I'm going to click OK. And once I do that, if you notice on the bottom here, there's going to be this option that says Gradle build is running. And that means that Gradle, which is the way that Android projects are built, is doing all its magic to get all your files, compile it, build it into an APK, and be able to finally deploy it into the target that you said you wanted to deploy onto. So when this Gradle build finishes running, I should be able to see what I have from here onto my screen here. So this might take a while, or this might be really fast, depending, again, on whether you've already done this, you've already deployed the same app to an emulator before, or depending on how fast your computer runs. So luckily, that did not take too long for me. So now I can see it's installing the APK itself and launching it. So that's great. So now we see this basic app that we created where we added a text view and we customized our own text. So that was our first user story. So now we want to be able to set a custom background color. So how we could do that is, if you remember from the demo app, in my app, the background color wasn't white, but it was a shade of blue. So what we want to do here is we want to go back to Android Studio, and you want to go into the text view, because sadly there isn't a way for you to just set the background for the whole layout itself. So if we go to the text view of our layout, we could go into this relative layout tag. So this relative layout means this whole, if you notice, when I click on relative layout, this whole box is bordered. And when I click on text view, it's just this little text view that's bordered. So whatever view you select, the view on the preview is going to show you which view you're working with. So when I click on this text view, click within this text view, I see that my text view is selected. But if I click into this relative layout view, I see the whole screen is selected. And the way to add a background color for any view is with the background property. So I'm going to go ahead and a background. And it's going to ask me, okay, do I want to set it to a color or do I want to set it to an image? So this means I can set my background to just a solid color, or if I had an image to set it as a background, I can set it as that. Kind of like setting a background image for your desktop. So I think I'm just going to go with one of the default colors here and see what this one is here. So this one is pink, which I'm okay with. That's a great color. So I'm going to keep it with that. And it looks pretty good to me right now, so I'm going to run it and see what happens. So again, I'm going to go into the run option on top here and click run app. It's going to ask me the same questions again. If you don't want to see this dialog pop up every time, you could check this box here, and then you won't see the option here. But I kind of like being able to choose where I'm going to deploy my app every time, so I'm not going to check that box. But if you wanted to, you could definitely check that box. So again, you can see that Gradle is running here. And since we already built and deployed our app once before, this should take a lot less longer than the first time. And luckily, this time only took 6 seconds. And we see exactly what we expect, which is we saw the text view, and then we saw our background set to this custom color that we wanted to. Great, so we've finished 2 of the 3 required user stories at this point, and now we want to work on this last one, which is a bit more difficult. So for this last user story, we want to create a button that when we tap on it, it changes the text color of the label. So the first thing we should do is we should create a button somewhere. So let's do that by going back into Android Studio. So if we go into Android Studio and we go back to the design view, we see all this different options we can do. And if you look into one of these options, the third option is buttons. So I'm going to click into buttons, and there's a ton of different options I could put. I could put a regular button, I could put an image button, I could put some radio buttons, I could put toggle buttons. But since we just want a button right now, I'm going to make it simple and just go with a regular button. So I'm going to select this regular button here, and I'm going to drag it to somewhere here. So if you notice, the way I drag it, all these numbers pop up, and if I wanted to center it, I'll have to make sure that the center line comes up. And if I wanted it to center within the screen, I want to make sure the line horizontally and vertically comes up. So I kind of just want it centered horizontally somewhere towards the bottom. So I'm going to put it here. And we see that our button is now on our screen. And similarly to how we were able to edit attributes directly by clicking on this text view here, we can do the same thing here. So this button, when we click on this button, if you remember from the user story, when we click on this button, we want to change the text color. So I'm going to call this button something appropriate, more appropriate than button. I'm going to call it change text color. So I changed the text that was here, and now we can see that our button has a name. So let's run our project and see if we can see our button and if it's going to be able to do anything. It's probably not going to be able to do anything right now because we haven't hooked it up, but let's just run it to make sure that everything is working correctly. So Gradle is doing its magic. This time it only took 7 seconds. Not too bad. So now we have this thing, and we do see our button here, but unfortunately when we click it, it's not doing much. So now we have to hook up the logic for what the button is going to do when it's clicked. And the way to do that is, there are a couple ways to do it, but the most common way to do it is to do it within the activity code itself. So we're going to navigate back to our main activity. So there's some stuff going on here, but what we basically want to do is we want to somehow hook up this button in order for it to do something when it's clicked. So I'm going to make the text here bigger. So what we want here is, first we have to grab this button in order to start doing stuff with it. And the way you grab views from activities is with this method called findViewById. So findViewById tells Android, hey, I want to grab this view so I could be able to start doing things with it. And like its name says, findViewById requires you to give it an ID. And if you go back to our XML file, you notice that the ID was automatically generated with button. So we're going to take this button. This means that this button is identified by Android with this name. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it here. So this gives me back the view. And once I have the view, I can start doing things with it. So since we want it to do something on click, the way to do that in Android is by setting an on click listener. So I'm going to do set on click listener. And autocomplete is very helpful in that it knows exactly what I want. So I'm going to press enter to autocomplete it. And now it wants to know, okay, what do you do? What do you want me to do when you actually click on it? So the way to do that is you want to create a new on-click listener. And autocomplete is going to be very helpful at this point. So what I'm going to do is going to type new, and type on click listener. And once I type on, autocomplete is already ready for me to generate what it thinks I need, which is exactly what I need. I want the view on click listener. So what we've written here in these like 5 lines of code is basically we told Android to grab our view. This is what this highlighted code here is doing. We grabbed our view by its ID, and this ID was button, and we set an on-click listener on it. And when we set an on-click listener on it, we have to create this new on-click listener object. And that way, when this on-click thing is called, we can do whatever we want within this method. So let's just make sure that this on-click listener is working. So let's print out some logs. So the way to print out logs in Android is with the log.i method. And the log.i method wants a tag. That's how you're going to be able to find your logs and a message. So I'm just going to do this for now, and then I'll quickly explain what's going on here. So when you do log, you're going to have to import the log file. And the easy way to do that is to do option enter. And that automatically imports this line for you. So this line is what imported when I did the option enter. So I went and did the log.i thing. I means this is just an info thing. And if you notice, there were different options down here for what kind of messages you want to be able to log. So when I did log.i, that means this log message will only show up if I went with the info option. Verbose shows every single log message that will ever be printed. If I did log.e here, for example, this message will only show up if I selected only to show error messages. So I'm going to do log.i for now, since this is just an info message. And this tag is useful because I can start filtering through messages by clicking this. So let's run our app and see what happens now when I click the button. Hopefully it's doing something now that we've set an on-click listener. So my app is launched. And notice what's going on here down here in the logs that are being printed out. Once I click this, the log prints out my name and Karen and button clicked, which is what I did here. And the tag is useful because now you could do something like filter for everything that's your tag. And that makes it helpful because then you don't have to see all this other tags that the Android system is just printing out that you don't really care about. So great, so now our button is hooked up and it can do things. But if you remember, what we actually wanted it to do is we wanted to change the text color once the button is clicked. So we wanted to change the color of this text here once the button is clicked. And the way to do that is very similar to how we've been doing everything else. So in way to change the text color, we have to find the view first in order to do something on it. So that's going to be the same way we found the button by using find view by ID and giving it the ID name. So the ID name of the text view was text view. This was auto generated. So I'm going to do that. And then if I press the dot, methods will stop popping out and I can see all the things I can start doing once I have a view. So hopefully what I want to do is I want to set the text color. So how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to type in text color and see what comes up. So I'm typing in text color. And unfortunately nothing comes up. And this is because right now it doesn't really know that this view is a text view. So how we can make it smarter is by casting this view as a text view here. And again, I'm going to have to import this text view class. So the way to do that is to click until you see this little box pop up and then press on option, enter. And if you notice, this line was added here and now the red squiggly line is gone. So once I've casted the text view, I want to try again to see if there's a set text color method. So I did a dot and see all the methods are able to be auto-completed. I'm going to do set text, and hopefully there's a color. So great. So now there is all these things that I could do with it. So I want to say set text color. And what you could put in here is you could put in the way that Android indexes colors is by everything that was already inputted. So if I do r.color, I can see all the colors that are available to me right now. So I could do something like this, and you can see what r.color.primary is by using something like that. And if you see here, now we get this warning that says you should pass a resolve color instead of the resource ID. So why don't we just follow the instructions that it gives us, which is to do get resource.get color instead of the simple colors. So let's do get resources get color. Great, so that got rid of the complaint. Don't worry too much about this crossed out thing here. This means this method is deprecated, but we can still use it for our purposes right now. So hopefully what will happen when we relaunch the app is that when we press the button here, our text will change from black to blue. So let's go and run our app again and see what happens. So here's our redeployed app with brand new code, and I'm gonna press this button and hopefully our text will change colors. Yay, so that all worked because now we know that when we press this button here, our text was able to change from black to blue. So that is the end of all the required stories here. We will be going through some optional user stories with some more optional advanced features. So if you're interested in building out more advanced features, be sure to watch the next video where we'll be doing some bit of more advanced features.